I would bet that your English or writing teacher brought you today. So that person loves to read and write. And I know, as a teacher, that that person has influenced you in some positive way. First of all, you're here, and second of all, she or he is with you every day doing what he or she can to make your life more rich in literature and the written word. The Miami Book Fair is one of the favorite things that we do in our office and that we embrace every year, because there aren't too many cities in the country that have such a wealth of authors coming to one place in 1 week. You're here this morning courtesy of your school and the college and the district office, but we encourage you to come back. It's right outside all weekend long. There's so many cool things to do that you're going to have a lot of fun. Of course, we are going to be on our best behavior, because when people come to us from all over the country, we want to show them what Miami students are like. So as we listen to our author today, give her your rapt attention. Don't text, don't do anything that you wouldn't like someone to do if you were up here speaking. So I am not going to take up any more time. And then first, I would like to introduce a special person to me. That's my niece, Olivia Sands, who is a lover of books, a lover of acting and theater, and she is going to introduce our author. Come on up, Olivia.
Hi, guys. So, as you can see, you all have the very colorful books matching the very colorful dress of our author. She's also a very colorful person, so you're going to get to see that. This book is all about how women have shaped part of our history that traditionally only men have shaped, which is, really rad, hence the name of the book. She's a New York Times bestseller author of this particular book, and her book of fiction, Rid Me, A Story, was published in 2006 as part of an acclaimed 33.5 series. She is also the co-founder of the Encyclopedia Project, and is the chair of the School of Liberty Arts and Oklahoma School for the Arts. So without further ado, allow me to introduce Kate Schatz.
Hi, guys. How are you? Okay, I have to kind of set up all my stuff here for a second. Thank you, Olivia, for the introduction. It's true, I wore a really bright dress because I knew there'd be a lot of you, and I wanted to make sure you could see me. Also, it's so hot in Miami, and everything else I packed seems like too sticky. Wonderful introduction. The only thing that I'll correct is I think you said I teach at the Oklahoma School for the Arts. Thankfully, no disrespect for Oklahoma, I teach at the Oakland School for the Arts in Oakland, California. That's okay, no worries. Very close. They start with Oak. But I'm not from Oklahoma, I am from California. Again, not to diss Oklahoma, but I'm a big fan of California. The Warriors are my team. No disrespect to the Heat. Anyway, so this is actually my first time in Miami. I had free time yesterday, so I was like, what else should I do but take an Uber to the Everglades and go meet some alligators? So I went on one of those airboat tours, and I was like, had an alligator right next to my foot. It was crazy. How lucky you guys are to live near such an amazing place. And in the introduction, she also mentioned that this book fair is really unique, and I want to reiterate that. Ever since I've been publishing and writing, people are always like, oh, you've got to go to the Miami Book Fair. It is the best one. It is really like people in California, people all over talk about this book fair as everybody's favorite event, and so far I agree. It's really fantastic, and there's so many great writers here, so I hope you guys take advantage of more of it. So, as we've established, my name is Kate Schatz, and I'm a writer. I'm also a high school teacher. I'm also a mom, so I have those like mom-teacher superpowers where I can like see the people in the back row, and I can see the people texting underneath their seat. So, and I'm not afraid to call you out for it, so please don't do that. My students love that. I'll be like, I can see your phone under your desk. They're like, how did you do that? Like mom-teacher eyes. So I wrote this book called Rad American Women A to Z, and it is a children's book, and maybe you're like, yeah, I am not a child, I am a very sophisticated high school student. And actually, wait, that reminds me. Let me know who I'm working with here. Raise your hand if you are in high school. Okay, good. Okay, cool. Now down. Now raise your hand if you are in middle school. Do we have middle school? Hey, guys. Oh, everybody. Oh, okay. Now, do we have any, is anybody younger than middle school? Do we have any elementary school folks? Okay. Okay, all right. Let's go lower. Are there any babies? Okay, no baby. Okay, well, maybe inside you feel like a baby, but we have no actual babies here. Okay, and then how many teachers are here? If I can see the teachers' hands. Okay. Woo! Okay. And teachers, I do have presents for you. I have posters for you in your classroom, so please make sure that you come talk to me after so I can give you guys a poster. I don't have a poster for every student, but all of the teachers will get a poster. All right, so we've got mostly high school students, we have some middle school students, and we have a few totally adorable elementary school students. So this book is, when you publish a book, they make, especially a book for young people, they really make you say what age group it's for. Like, you have to say that. And I kept saying, I don't know, I think it's for everybody. I think everybody will find this interesting. But they really make you do that because that's how marketing works. So this book is technically aimed at the middle grade reader, which is about 8 to 12 years old. But I will tell you that my dad loves it. He's not in middle school. It's been very popular with adults. I read it to my 6-year-old daughter. I read it to my 2-year-old son as well, but he doesn't quite get it yet. But the point is that I think that great storytelling is great storytelling, right? Great stories are great stories no matter what age you are. The women that I talk about in this book, I selected for many reasons, which I can talk about in the Q&A, but one of the main reasons is that each one of these women has an incredible life story. And again, a great story that gets your attention, that's inspiring, that's gonna work on you if you're 7, or if you're 17, or if you're 70, right? We all know what makes a really compelling story. And I have always been a lover of children's books. And I think that if you talk to most adults, as, you know, even fanciest writers, if you ask them, what are the books that really shaped you, that really stand out in your mind, that you'll always remember, a lot of people talk about the books they read when they were very young, right? Is that the case for anybody? Can anybody remember, like, a book that you really, really love, and you read when you were a kid? Yes. What would you say? Junie B. Jones, right? Like, so yes, right? You're always going to remember, right? And sometimes it's because that was maybe like the first chapter book that you read and you felt like a big kid because you were reading it, or it had big words. Maybe it was a book you read when you were young and it introduced some kind of new idea, right? I know a lot of young people say that Harry Potter is huge. I mean, Harry Potter is amazing. I'm reading it to my kid right now, and that's a children's book, but we all love it. And so for me, with making this book, I wanted to create a children's book that could be that kind of book for young people, that they would read when they're young, that they would always remember. But I wanted to make it more than a story about a wizard, no disrespect, I love Harry. Yet I wanted to make it something that would really have an impact and that would be fun and inspiring, but also would be educational and would maybe present a different perspective on history and the history of the United States and the history of women than we normally get in our textbooks in classes and in our history classes, right? I think things have changed to some degree, but when I was in high school and middle school, I cannot remember learning about a single woman in any of my history classes, right? I really can't. And I remember learning about like the Teapot Dome scandal, and I remember reading about the New Deal. I remember learning about all these things, and I love history. But I don't remember learning about any women. I don't remember learning about any people of color, aside from Martin Luther King when we had our little section on the civil rights movement. Maybe we had one little section on the 1960s when there was like a paragraph on the women's movement. But that was pretty much it. I'm older than you guys, so things have changed to some degree. But that was really struck me when I was young, and it stayed with me. I look at our money, and I don't see the faces of any women on our money, right? You travel other countries in the world, they put women on their money all the time. They put authors and scientists and leaders. That's like a normal thing all over the world to just have a woman on your money. And it's like this huge deal here, right? You look at what schools are named after, what important streets in your town are named after, what holidays we get off, whose birthdays we celebrate, right? These tend to be men. Now, I want to make something very clear, right? I love men. Men are great. I'm married to one. I gave birth to one. I have a son, right? This is not the angry feminist who hates men. I am often an angry feminist, but it's not because I hate men. It's because I hate the way that gender is imposed on people and young people. And I think, and I want to acknowledge, that just as it's very challenging to be a woman or a girl in society, it's equally as hard to be a young man or a man in society. Because we have so many expectations that are placed among men, right? What masculinity kind of does to men. So that's equally challenging. And someday I might write a book about that. But for this time, I have written this book. I'm going to read to you from it in a second. But first, I wanted to show you from my magical thing here that I have been writing for a really long time. And I brought with me, my first books that I ever wrote. I wrote this in second grade. I know you can't really see it, but this is how I developed my love of writing. This book is called Little Sisters, and it's a stirring account of one 7-year-old's annoying younger sister, totally ripped off from Beverly Cleary Ramona books. And I wrote it and illustrated it. There is a picture of me. I will maybe show it to you afterwards. And I say, hi, my name is Kate Schatz. I'm 8.5 years old. I like to play baseball. I have a mom, dad, and a little sister and a cat. I say my birthday. I was born in San Jose, California. I love to read. I like Judy Blume, Beverly Cleary, and Carolyn Keene, who wrote the Nancy Drew books. So that's my first book. I followed that one up with the hard-hitting account in 5th grade of a monkey that went to outer space. It's called I Was an Experimental Chimp, and it follows one chimpanzee's journey into outer space. So I wrote these books. My elementary school had a program where we got to write these books, and our teachers did all this work to put them together. And that's really where I developed my love of writing, and I really didn't stop. All right, I'm going to put this here. And it was because of the encouragement of a number of my teachers in high school and in college and beyond that I learned to take my writing seriously, right? It was always something I really loved to do, but it took me a while to actually think, oh, I could actually do this for real, right? So let me just get my timepiece here so I know what time it is. And I am happy to answer more questions about how I became a writer, all of that stuff in the Q&A. What I'm going to do is read to you guys from the book, talk a little bit more about it, and then I'll give us a lot of time for questions because I love answering questions and people usually have a lot. If you don't have any questions, I can just keep talking, so it's fine. We're not going to sit here awkwardly for a long time while nobody asks questions. I'll just start telling stories about the alligators I saw. All right, so this is called, again, Rad American Women A to Z. We use the word rad in the title, partly because the illustrator and I both grew up in California. She was like a skateboarding punk in the 80s down in LA. I was like a surfer hippie kid up in Northern California. We all use the word rad a lot growing up. It's a word that means cool, it means awesome, etc. But it's also short for the word radical, right? And the word radical has a number of meanings. It comes from the Latin, meaning from the root, right? So if you're in math and you're using radicals. So it means from the root. So we're thinking with this book about people who have gone to the root of a problem to try to make a change and make a difference. Something that's radical is also something that's really different from the norm, right? Something that's really unexpected, that's never been done before, that nobody's really seen. Maybe something radical is really on the fringe, kind of crazy, but it can still make a difference. So that's how we chose that word, and it's a common thread among all the women in this book. With Rad American Women A to Z, we selected 26 women because there's 26 letters of the alphabet. Although some people point out that X does not have a woman. I'll read X in a little bit. But we cheated and put 2 women in for G. We included the Grimke Sisters. And I'll read about them in just a second. I'm going to start with the story of, I'm going to take a sip of water first. I'm going to read to you about Ella Baker. How many of you have ever heard of Ella Baker? Okay, I see a couple hands. Great. So I actually love that when I read, because now, after today, if you ever find yourself in an auditorium and someone randomly asks you if you've ever heard of Ella Baker, you'll all raise your hands. That probably won't happen, but it might. So I'm going to read Ella Baker, and I'll tell you why. On the way here, I was in a shuttle from my hotel in traffic for like 40 minutes while some drawbridge was going up. But I was in that shuttle with Congressman John Lewis, who is a congressman from the state of Georgia. Congressman John Lewis was a major player in the civil rights movement. He was there with Martin Luther King. He was there during the bus boycotts. He was a major organizer during that time, and now he is a congressman and a really famous guy. And I was like, oh my God, hi. So I gave him a book. But he did work with this person. Okay, so E is for Ella Baker, who shaped the civil rights movement from behind the scenes. Ella Baker was one of the most important people in the civil rights movement, but she's not the most famous, and that's how she liked it. Ella learned about racism and cruelty at an early age. Her grandmother had been born a slave, and she told Ella about how she was whipped for refusing to marry the man her master had chosen for her. Ella admired her grandmother's courage. After college, Ella moved to New York and became involved with several organizations working to support women, African Americans, and workers. She was an excellent leader, but she didn't want to be in the spotlight. She wanted to work in the background, teaching ordinary people how to make a difference. Ella believed that for real change to happen, people needed to come together in organized ways to talk about their goals and plan their actions. Many people think that famous leaders like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks worked alone, but they were part of large groups of people who worked hard to plan the marches, rallies, sit-ins, and other activities that were key to the success of the civil rights movement in America. Ella Baker worked with both Dr. King and Rosa Parks, and she helped start two of the most important groups of the time, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. That's often referred to as SNCC, because it's hard to say. Ella was a leader in the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and she also helped young white students join with black people in the fight for civil rights. This was a time when most political leaders were men, but that didn't stop Ella. Her grandmother's courage and strength were major inspirations to Ella throughout her life, whether she was telling the mayor of New York City why black and white children should go to school together, organizing sit-ins in restaurants that didn't allow black people inside, or helping people register to vote during the Mississippi Freedom Summer. Ella was called the backbone of the civil rights movement, but she was also a big part of its heart. And now you've all heard of Ella Baker, and you know a little bit about her. And so again, when I go to schools to share this book, especially with young people, one of the first questions they often ask me is Rosa Parks in this book? And I tell them no, and it's not because Rosa Parks isn't an amazing woman whose name we should know, but that she's one of the only women from the civil rights movement that young people tend to learn about, right? And there were so many more. So it was intentional that I included Ella Baker, who again was a mentor to Rosa Parks. And I also included the singer Odetta, who was Rosa Parks' favorite singer, right? And I wanted to expand kind of who we've heard of and who we associate with these movements. Similarly, we always hear about Dr. Martin Luther King, who is an incredible, amazing person. But there were so many other people that were organizing alongside him. And Ella Baker very intentionally did not want to be famous. She was like, that is not my thing. I want to be making this movement happen. All right, so we're going to rewind way back in time to G for the Grimke Sisters. And these sisters are this is as far back as we go in this book. They were technically born in the late 1700s, in the 1790s. So this is the Grimke Sisters, who devoted their lives to the pursuit of freedom and equality for all. Angelina and Sarah Grimke were sisters who were born 12 years apart, but they were like twins when it came to their commitment to ending slavery. In the early 1800s, the Grimke family lived in Charleston, South Carolina, on a fancy cotton plantation. Like most other rich white families in the South, the Grimkes owned slaves. The sisters saw their daily suffering and knew it wasn't right. Even though it was against the law, Angelina secretly taught one of their slaves to read. She and Sarah tried to convince their parents that slavery was wrong, but Mr. and Mrs. Grimke wouldn't listen. So the girls made a hard but powerful decision. They said goodbye to their parents, their 11 siblings, and the fancy dresses and dances. Then they moved north to Philadelphia, where the anti-slavery movement was beginning. The Grimke sisters joined the Quakers, a religious group dedicated to nonviolence, and they became abolitionists, people working to end slavery. They gave passionate speeches and wrote fiery letters in support of freedom for all people. They didn't care if people tried to punish or persecute them for their convictions. Emancipation, Angelina wrote, is a cause worth dying for. The pro-slavery people were furious at the sisters, and some of their fellow Quakers were shocked that a woman should say such things. Some angry people even burned their articles and letters. Not everyone was upset, though. Many people admired Sarah and Angelina. They traveled to more than 67 cities, giving speeches to mixed audiences of men and women, blacks and whites together. In their lectures, they explained that the equality of women was connected to the freedom of black people. Again, people were outraged because they had never heard white women express these kinds of ideas. Many abolitionist men failed to support equality for women, and many early feminists did not care about ending slavery. In 1838, Angelina became the first American woman to speak in front of a legislative body when she presented anti-slavery petitions signed by 20,000 women to the Massachusetts legislature. Sarah and Angelina lived and worked together for their entire lives, united in their belief that all human beings deserve freedom and equality. So that is the Grimke sisters, and I love this illustration of them because they look so angry. We intentionally wanted to show a range of emotions on the faces of these women. We didn't want them to all look really angry, so some of them are laughing, some look like they're kind of thinking, but they were very serious, so we kept them that way. All right, I'm gonna zoom toward the end of the book now. I'm skipping over all kinds of incredible women. We've got Isadora Duncan, the pioneer of modern dance. We've got Kate Bornstein, a transgender playwright and activist. We've got Maya Lin, the architect who designed the Vietnam Wall. We've got Patti Smith, the punk singer. We've got Rachel Carson, the biologist. But I'm going to go to Temple Grandin. So T is for Temple, and you'll see in this illustration that she's with a cow, which may seem weird if you're not familiar with her. But if you know about Temple, you'll understand why there's a cow with her. So T is for Temple, who shows us the power of a brilliant mind. Temple Grandin's parents knew she was different when she was still just a baby. She didn't talk, laugh, or make eye contact, and she had enormous tantrums. Temple reacted strongly to loud sounds, scratchy fabrics, and strong smells. In 1949, when she was only 2 years old, a doctor diagnosed her with autism, a developmental disorder that affects behavior and communication. Everyone knew there was something wrong with Temple, but they didn't realize that a lot was right. Temple's mind was different, but it wasn't damaged. It was brilliant. Temple is a visual thinker. Her mind shows her pictures instead of words. As a child, she was an amazing artist, and she loved to design and build things. But talking to people made her uncomfortable, like an anthropologist from Mars, she says. And she was bullied constantly. She struggled in school until she finally found something she could relate to. Once, during a visit to a cattle ranch, Temple felt a deep connection to the horses and cows. She knew that the animals had feelings, but that they couldn't express them with words. This was exactly how she'd always felt herself. She realized that autistic people and animals have a lot in common. She started getting ideas for ways that farmers and ranchers could help their animals feel safe and happy. Using her drawing skills and visual mind, she started to design pens, walkways, devices, and buildings that would improve the animals' quality of life. At first, many farmers and ranchers didn't want to work with her. They thought her ideas were strange, and they didn't think an autistic woman could help them. But once they saw how the animals reacted to her and how well her ideas worked, they started to listen. Dr. Temple Grandin has written several books, worked as a college professor, and given speeches all around the world. She has dedicated her life to reducing the suffering and anxiety of animals and to educating people about autism and the mind. And that is our story of Temple. I am going to put someone on the spot now. Well, I'm not really, because I'm going to ask for a volunteer. Do I have a volunteer? Maybe from this front row. Okay, there we go. Do you know what you're going to do? Okay. All right, come up on the stage. You're going to dance. No, I'm just kidding. That's bold. She does not even know what I'm going to have her do, you guys. It could be anything right now. Luckily, it's just reading. All right, so in this book, what's your name?
Amber.
Amber? Hi, Amber. What grade are you in?
10th.
Where do you go to school?
NMB. Northern Beach Senior High
I didn't even hear what that school was called.
School. Northern Beach Senior High
Okay,
School.
great. Awesome.
Charges.
All right, so in this book, in most alphabet books, if you've read them when you were a kid, right, you read the book about animals, and you get to the X page, and I'll tell you that any author writing an A to Z book struggles with X. We don't have a lot of words in the English language that start with X, so there's always that random bird that you've never heard of, like the xenops, you know, right? So in this book, instead of, not that there's no names that start with X, but we decided to make X for the women whose names we don't know. So you'll see the illustrations are these silhouettes of people doing different activities. And I'm going to have Amber read this page about X.
Okay.
So please give her, you guys have been awesome so far, but please be extra attentive to Amber. Thank you.
X is for the women whose names we don't know. It's for the women we haven't learned about yet, and the women whose stories we will never read. X is for the women whose voices weren't heard. For the women who aren't in history books or the Hall of Fame or the postage stamps or coins. For the women who didn't get credit for their ideas and inventions, who couldn't own properties or sign their own names. The women who weren't taught to read or write but managed to communicate anyway, who weren't allowed to work but still supported their families, or who would work all day but weren't paid as much as the men. X is for the radical history that didn't get recorded. X is for our mothers, our matriarchs, our ancestors, the nurses and neighbors and aunties and teachers, the teachers who made huge changes and the women who made dinner. X is for the hand that built and shared and wrote and fought, the bodies that birthed and worked and strained to keep going, the feet that walk, ran, jump, and balance, the minds that dreams and desire, the hearts that love. X is for all, is also for all that's happening now and all that is still to come. X is for the women in homes and offices and fields and labs and classrooms who invented and transformed and built and created. X is for all who don't know about the past, but X is also for the future. X marks the spot where we stand today. What will you do to make the world rad?
Thank you very much. That was wonderful. Awesome. All right. So I want you to think, I'm going to read one more of the women in this book, but I want you to think about this. Thank you so much, Amber. That takes a lot to get up and read. I want you to think about this idea of X and think about, you know, is there a woman that you can think of, maybe someone you know in your life, in your family, or someone, you know, an athlete or a musician or a scientist or someone who you think is an X, right? Meaning someone who nobody really knows about, but maybe we should, okay? So I'm going to read to you the final woman in this book, and then we're going to talk and I'll answer questions. And this is a writer who grew up in Florida, so I thought it'd be appropriate to go there. And I will tell you afterward why Zora Neale Hurston actually is one of these X's, right? So Z is for Zora Neale Hurston, who captured the stories and voices of many generations. Zora Neale Hurston's mother encouraged her children to always jump at the sun. It was good advice, and it's just what the bold, brash Zora did. Zora grew up in Eatonville, Florida, the first all-black town in the United States, a place where black people could own businesses and be elected to important positions. Zora loved Eatonville and the people in it. When she wasn't reading books, she was listening to the townsfolk tell colorful stories that had been passed down for generations. Zora absorbed this folklore and began to make up her own fantastical tales as well. After her mother died, Zora's life became difficult. For years, she drifted around without a real home, working here and there as a maid, but always wanting more. She managed to make her way to Howard University, where she studied theater and joined a literary club. From there, she headed to New York City, where she settled in the neighborhood of Harlem. She joined thousands of other African Americans who were creating music, art, and literature. This was called the Harlem Renaissance. Zora was charming and outgoing, and she quickly befriended great artists like Langston Hughes. She began publishing her stories and plays, most of which were based on the stories and people she remembered from her Southern childhood. It was an exciting time for Black artists like Zora, and she was in the center of it all. A scholarship to Barnard College led the ever-curious Zora to study cultural anthropology. She began traveling the world to record the stories, songs, dances, and voices of Black cultures. This kind of research is called fieldwork. She trekked across the American South, Haiti, Jamaica, and Honduras, and she did a lot in Florida too, actually, taking pictures and learning all about these rural communities. She published essays about what she learned, and she also wrote novels, using her research to create authentic dialogue between her characters, like Janie and Tea Cake in her novel Their Eyes Were Watching God. In all, Zora published 4 novels, 2 books of folklore, an autobiography, numerous short stories, and several essays, articles, and plays. She is considered one of the great American writers of the 20th century. And what's interesting to note about Zora Neale Hurston is that though she was very successful during the time of the Harlem Renaissance in the 1930s and 40s, she died in the 1960s alone, totally broke, and no one would publish her work anymore. She basically kind of fell out of favor after the Harlem Renaissance had kind of dwindled down. No one would publish her. She was very sick, and she didn't make any money. And no one had heard of her. So by the 1980s, her work was totally out of print, which means that you couldn't find her books anywhere, right? Like if a publisher just decides to stop printing copies of the book, it's out of print and it's not in any bookstores. So in the 1980s, a writer named Alice Walker, who wrote The Color Purple, she was very young at the time, and she was doing research, and she discovered some of the manuscripts of Zora Neale Hurston and read them, including her novel, Their Eyes Were Watching God. And she was like, why don't we all know who this person is? And she's basically started a campaign to get her books back into print and to get people to know about this writer. And fast forward 20 years or so, and her books are taught in many schools across the country, and she's become kind of a famous writer again. But, so to connect it to that page about X, she was someone who had become X. Nobody knew who she was. She'd been forgotten. And it was the work of one person who kind of brought her back to prominence. So I wanted to end with that story. I wanted to show you one thing real quick. So think of your questions, but people often want to know, I did not do the illustrations for this book. That is not me. The illustrations are done by an artist who lives in Berkeley. And can anybody guess, maybe you just saw me pull them out, can anybody guess what medium she used to create these illustrations? Yes, in the back. Yes. Usually people guess a bunch of stuff and they can't guess. All right, so the illustrations are all paper cuts. So she traces the image on a piece of black construction paper, right, just regular, bigger than this, but plain construction paper. And then she takes an X-Acto knife and she starts to cut. So every piece of white that you see in those illustrations, that's just white space, and the black is the paper, and they all hold together as one piece. So I know you're far away, you can't totally see, but they are almost like lace. They're very delicate. This is actually a reject from our next book. This is Maria Mozart. She was Mozart's older sister, who was even more talented than Mozart and potentially helped him compose his symphonies. And they toured together while they were teenagers all over Europe. But then when she turned 18, her father made her get married and made her stop playing piano. So this is Maria Mozart. And then this is a cut of a surfer from Australia. So you see her right in the middle, and you got the wave here. So this is Miriam, the illustrator. I had to promise that I would tell you that she thinks this one is terrible, and it's not her best work. But you see that they're very delicate. It all hangs together almost like, and I make this comparison, I think she hates it, but it's almost like when you carve a pumpkin, and it's like you cut that wrong part out, like the whole face just falls in the pumpkin. So if she cuts the wrong part, the whole thing can kind of fall apart. So that's how we do the illustrations. They get scanned onto the computer, and then when the book is laid out, we added the color after in post-production. So the original art is just the black paper, and the white part just becomes, she mounts it onto white paper, and so that's what the white part becomes, and that's how the illustrations are created. So with that said, I would love to answer any questions that you guys have. Ooh, you get to come up to a microphone. Great.
In order to keep it a little bit organized, we would like, maybe your teachers can assist, pick 2 or 3 kids from every school who are
Okay.
here, and you can get in line, and that way you'll get your chance and everybody can hear you.
Oh.
And we'll start up here
Okay.
or wherever. Just make sure you line up.
Make your way to the microphone, my friends.
Make your way to the mic, and we'll have time for enough for a few, each school to be represented. I'm not choosing, let your teachers choose you.
All right. All right, so as other people are coming up, if folks could quiet down so we can hear the questions.
Right, if
there's
everybody
one over
can
there.
get quiet, we can start the questions
Great.
immediately.
I will start right here, and then I'll kind of ping pong back and forth. And I will try to answer all the questions. I mean, we've got a while, so. All right, first question, and again, if folks could quiet down so you can hear. You, right here.
When was your first book published?
And then tell me your name, too.
When was your first book published?
What's your name?
Atme.
Okay, so the question is, where was my first book published? When? My first book, which is called Rid of Me, which is definitely not a children's book, because it has grown-up stuff in it. It was published in 2006, I think. Yes, and it was published in a book series where there's a whole bunch of books, and each book is about a different album, so different writers are writing about music. Most of them are nonfiction, but I wrote a book of fiction about an album from the 90s by PJ Harvey. If anybody knows PJ Harvey, she's awesome. So that's one. Good question, thank you. All right, over here.
Hi.
Hi.
My name's Angelise, and my question was in today's society, what are your thoughts when it comes to men and women, how, from back then, how it changed?
Oh, how much time do we have here? Okay, so the question is how have things changed between men and women? Oh, wow. Well, I think that we can say that in many ways, we, as a society, we've come incredibly far in terms of gender equality. I think that we've, women have access to things that they didn't have 200 years ago. At the same time, women still make 78 cents to the dollar that men make, right? That's, we still have extreme underrepresentation of women in political office. And we still have a government that doesn't respect women's bodies. Mm-hmm. So there are institutional changes. So what I would say is I'd make a distinction between cultural changes and institutional changes. Institutional changes meaning the institutions of our country, right? The government, the police forces, these things that are institutions that shape our lives. Whereas I think culturally, among you guys, right, and people, there's a lot more freedom. There's a lot more freedom for women, for people who don't choose a gender to express themselves, right? That's changed a lot. But institutionally, in those institutions that hold a lot of power, there's still a lot of work to be done.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
How long did it take to do the art for the construction?
So I'll tell you a secret that Miriam, the illustrator, works so fast. It's kind of crazy how fast she works. It puts a lot of helpful pressure on me as the writer because it takes me a long time to write because I have to do so much research, right? Because this is nonfiction, I need to make sure that I have everything right. I can't be saying that something happened in 1842 when it didn't, right? So I have to make sure everything is really correct. So it takes me a long time. What takes her the longest is actually deciding which image to use and drawing it. Once she actually starts the process of cutting, she can do it so fast. We did a reading recently where I read for 10 minutes, and she did an entire paper cut in 10 minutes, from start to finish. It wasn't her best work, but it was really good. So she can do it in maybe half an hour to an hour, but the process of actually drawing it takes her a couple of hours. It takes her longer. Yeah. Great. Hi.
Hi. I just want to say I liked how you incorporated women of color and women of different genders and sexualities into your book. Mm-hmm. I just want to ask, did you have any, did you go through any challenges while writing your book?
Did I have any what?
Challenges while writing your book?
Oh, yeah, writing a book's really hard. Yes. So in terms of selecting people or just in general?
In general.
Yes, I did. This was you know what the hardest part was deciding which women to write about and narrowing it down. It becomes a very strange thing to be choosing these people and being sorry, Eleanor Roosevelt, you're not going to make it in my book, but you are. It's like picking teams for something. So that was probably the biggest challenge. Of course, basic writer things like meeting my deadlines and getting everything done and motivating myself to be always working, that's hard. But the real challenge is choosing the people. And thank you for your comment. That was, that was the intention of the book, was to focus on the stories of women of color and women whose stories are not normally told in history. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hi.
My name is Sebastian Perez, American Senior High School. I want to ask you something that's kind of difficult.
Great.
What, in your opinion, based on your knowledge, based on everything, why do you think women have been suppressed throughout history?
Oh, you guys are really good. Well, why has that happened? Well, you know what? I'll tell you something, that patriarchy, which is a system in which men are the rulers, right? Patriarch, patri is comes from the father. So a political or cultural system in which men rule, that's not something that is necessarily innate, right? So I think it's important to think that sometimes people think this is just the natural order of things, that men should just be in charge. But you can find examples of matrilineal societies, meaning societies and cultures that are dominated by women, where women do the work, they kind of control things, they organize things. You can find examples of those throughout history. So I'm kind of working around your question a little bit, but it's just to say that I don't know exactly why. I don't know if I'll go fully there to try to answer that question, but rather to make us think that it's not how it has to be, and it's not how it always has been, right? And in my research, I've read about a lot of different societies, again, where there is equality between the sexes. In the United States, we can mark the shift, which is that a lot of the early suffragists, right, the women who were working for the right to vote for women in the United States in the 1800s, they learned a lot of what they were talking about from Native American communities. So there's actually documentation of women like Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who were early suffragists. They were working with Native tribes and studying them, and they were observing the power and equality that women had in Native tribes in New England and around Virginia. So again, that existed here. It has existed on this land that we're on, but it doesn't exist now, which is to say that it can be changed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hi.
Hi, who do you think is the most influential woman so far in the 21st century?
In the 21st century. Okay, so we're 16 years into the 21st century. In the United States, most influential woman. Is it crazy if I say Beyonce? But I really mean it, because I think, again, that if we think about how change happens and how influence happens, institutionally, maybe there's like a politician who's very influential, right? But if we're thinking about influence, the influence that someone like Beyonce has had as a performer, as a dancer, but also as a role model and as a feminist, right? She went on the MTV Music Awards and she had the word feminist in giant lights behind her. I mean, that's crazy. That, people still think of feminists as like angry old white ladies. Like, to have Beyonce do that, that was a highly influential moment. Also, she makes great music. But I think that, and also the way that she operates within the music industry, the power that she has, right? I think so. I'm going to say Beyonce. Yes. Okay. Great. Yeah. I didn't just say that to make you guys like me. I really actually think that. All right. Yes.
Hi, I'm Melanie, and I'd like to know if there were any specific women that you find inspiring that you didn't put into your book.
Great question. So she wants to know if there's any women who I'm really inspired by that I didn't put in the book. Yes, absolutely. Some of my favorite personal heroes are not in this book. So one of them, the first one that comes to my mind is Jane Addams. Jane Addams, she won the Nobel Peace Prize. She was someone who was a social worker, and she was a white woman working in the 19th century helping immigrants in the Chicago area, and she built Hull House. Maybe you've studied this in your history classes. So she established what were called settlement houses that were for immigrant communities coming into America, and she built these houses where they could come live, and there were teachers teaching classes, teaching English, teaching basic skills like cooking, basically helping immigrant communities who were coming to America. So she's always been a big hero of mine. Especially at a time right now when we're having all this anxiety about immigration and refugees. So she's an example of someone who said, there are people coming here who need help. I'm going to create a system that actually helps people and supports them rather than alienates them. So Jane Addams would be one. Gertrude Stein is one of my favorite writers, and she's not in here. And I'll say the reason that Jane Addams didn't end up in here is because I did feel that she has gotten a lot of attention. She is often in history books with the story of Hull House. And in this book, J is for Jovita Idar, who I didn't even know about when I started the research. So I was planning on having Jane Addams, but when I was doing my research, I read about this woman who was from Texas. And she was living on the Texas-Mexico border in the 19th century, and she was a journalist. And she was pretty much a pioneer of bilingual education. She was one of the first people to teach in Spanish and in English to children. And she started a school for Mexican children in the United States. And I thought her story was so inspiring that I chose her over Jane. So yeah, there were times when my own personal favorites didn't make it.
Thank you.
Excellent. Oh, no one at that one, okay.
Hi, my
Hi.
name is Stacy. I have 2 questions. The first question is, like,
It's all good.
throughout your life, like, heading towards your career, was there any moment where you were like, I can't do this, or like a breaking point where you just like doubted yourself?
Yes. Yeah, okay, yes.
And, how did you overcome it? How did you overcome it?
Oh, okay, so then how did I overcome it? Absolutely. I mean, writing is a very challenging field, right? One, because it's very lonely, right? You know, it's not like if you're a dancer and you're with a dance troupe and you're all performing together. If you're an actor, you're in a play and you've got all your other buddies, right? When you're writing, you're just like by yourself typing, saying hello. So yes, you know, there was a time, it got especially challenging after I had children, right? It can be even harder because writing means taking time for yourself, and when you're a parent, especially of young children, you don't get a lot of that. So it was very hard for me to remind myself that I could carve out that time in my day to kind of work on it. And I overcame that in particular by just remembering that this is what I want to do, that I love to do. And also, I felt really inspired by stories of other women writers who have been parents and have had children and have still, I would read these stories about someone in like the 19th century who had like 4 kids and she still wrote with like a feather and ink in the dark by a candle. And I was like, okay, fine, I can do it. But actually, researching this book gave me a lot of inspiration too. So this is not a book that I could really quit on because literally everyone I'm writing about is so inspiring. Yeah. So I would feel like such a jerk if I was like, oh, I can't do this, she changed the world, but I can't finish a book. So, so yeah, that's part of how I've overcome.
Okay. My second question is, I'm a tattoo enthusiast, and you have some tattoos. Are there any significant tattoos to your writing?
Oh, yeah, actually, that's a good question. I'm also a tattoo enthusiast, clearly. Though I really recommend that you all wait until you're older to get your tattoos. Because there is a tattoo on my back that is a cover-up of my lame high school tattoo. So let that be a lesson. But significant to my writing, actually right here, there's an uppercase F and a lowercase f. And this is like my feminist writer tattoo. So the F is for feminism. Or it can also change depending on who's asking and how they're responding. But the upper and lowercase was just to kind of signify the writing font. Yeah, and the other ones, these are all, my grandmother was an artist, so I have a bunch that are of my grandma's art.
Okay, thank you.
Hi.
Yes.
My name's
I like tattoos that probably nobody else has. Yeah, so, yes.
My name's Valencia, and
A little louder.
I too wanted to become a writer. I just want to know your experiences and what you went through, your dedication.
Great. I'll tell you, I think one of the most important things about that is having people in your life who support you and finding people who can be a mentor to you. Okay. So I didn't take myself seriously as a writer until I was a junior in high school, and I went to a really normal, boring high school. Nothing, not cool, nothing fun. But we had a creative writing unit in my English class, and I wrote short stories. I'd always been writing, it was just this fun thing that I did. But I wrote a story for class, and I had a teacher, Mr. Martin, thank you, and he was like, you are really good at this, you should do this. And I was like, really? Okay. And then that stuck with me, like, oh, someone actually thinks this is something I could do. And then I went to college, and I took creative writing classes, and again, I got encouragement, and I made really strong connections with my teachers. And then I also found other people my age that were interested in that, so I joined like a literary journal, and I kind of formed a community. Again, because being a writer is often very lonely, it's very helpful to find some kind of community, whether that's an online community, and there's a lot of online kind of writing support communities, whether it's people your age, friends, and then again, if you when you go on to college, finding teachers who can kind of mentor you. And I've stayed in really good touch with all of my mentors, and that has been so helpful to me all along. I go to them for help, for support, for advice. I had a moment of crisis with an agent a while ago, some like book business stuff, and I called my professor from college and was like, I need advice, so making those connections I think is very, very helpful. And then also continuing to do it. Writing, like any art, any sport, it is a craft and you have to practice it, right? If you want to be the best basketball player out there, you don't just like cruise out there one day and like you're awesome, right? You have to play regularly and practice. If you want to be a great writer, you have to just write all the time. And the other thing you have to do is read. Okay, I think it's like a Stephen King quote, but there are no great writers who are not great readers. Okay, you have to be reading as much as you can. Yeah, that's some advice. Good job, you can do it. Hi.
How you doing? My name is Isaiah Lewis. I go to American Senior High School, class of 2017. One time for the Patriots. Who is your favorite author and why?
Oh, he asked, who's my favorite author and why? Awesome question. Okay, for children's books, I will always love Judy Blume. But I'm going to say my current favorite author is an Italian novelist named Elena Ferrante. And she is, that's actually a pen name, and she's a great novelist. And then I'm not going to just say this one. I also really love Octavia Butler, who's a science fiction writer. I highly recommend that everybody read the novel Kindred by Octavia Butler. Hi.
Hi. If you had the choice to do any other occupation, what would it be and why?
Okay, so if I could do any other occupation, what would it be and why? And if it's not teaching and writing, I would either be a marine biologist or a nurse practitioner. Because I really love the ocean and I really like dolphins. And also nurse practitioner, I really like women's health and like healthcare. So I almost, going back to the like crisis of like, did I ever want to give up? I did have a moment where I was like, maybe I'm just going to not write and I'm going to be a nurse. And then I started looking into nursing programs, but then I decided to keep writing. So.
Thank you.
Okay. Oh, I think we have time for like 2 more questions actually, because we need to get out to sign books. But if so I'm going to have the gentleman in the purple, and I'm going to have you over there, and the other folks, if you have come to have me sign. Oh. See, we've come far, ladies and gentlemen. All right. So your question.
Okay. Hello? Oh.
Okay, let's hear.
Hi.
Hi.
My question is, do you think that your book will inspire or like affect like the way people see women now?
Yeah, it will. And honestly, that's just like the most exciting thing that could have ever happened to me, because I already see young people talking about it in a way and getting excited, and I think that, the thing we have to remember is that change happens incrementally, right? Like, it happens in really small ways. So just for a kid to see these women as like heroes and to think that they're amazing, that like helps a change, right? Like that, and if there's like a couple kids who feel inspired reading this, like then that does ultimately go out and create change. So yeah, I've already heard, again, there's Kate Bornstein, who's a transgender playwright, she's in here, and I've had someone come to me already like in tears because she has a cousin who's transgender and has just come out to the family, and the family was having a really hard time with it, and they got a copy of this book and actually read about Kate Bornstein, and it actually helped the family to have a conversation and be more accepting, and the cousin was actually 11 years old, so it was a young person, and it helped the family be able to have a conversation. So if nothing else aside from that happens, I'm totally satisfied. But thank you. Good question.
Thank you.
All right, final question.
Hi, my name is Gloria from Beach High. My question is, what do you consider to be like a big problem and concerns to like the role of women today?
Okay, you guys are really good and get the heavy hitters. You guys, I have to say, I'm not just saying this, but this is like my favorite audience ever. You ask the best questions. This is great. So the biggest concern to women today is the right to own and control their own bodies, and that is not just about pro-choice or anti-choice. It's not just about that. It's about sexual assault. It's about violence, about domestic violence. It's about the control that women have over their own bodies goes out into all aspects of life. And then like really specifically a major concern for women in the world, like at this moment, there's an enormous refugee crisis going on in the world, and there are women and mothers who have no place to live, who are taking care of children. So I actually think that's one of, a huge, huge problem of that's happening right now. So
Thank you.
on that note.
Thank you. Thank
you,
you.
guys.
Let's stay in your seats, but give her a big hand. Let's give her a great hand. Woo! If you would all stay seated for just a moment, Ms. Schatz is going to go downstairs and get set up at the autograph table. So you go right ahead, and Olivia will escort you to show you where it is. And then we're going to get dismissed in an orderly fashion, I hope. No, I'm sure we will. Anyway, I just want to say you were a terrific audience. You were so good. Thank you so much for that. We're going to leave from the back of the auditorium. And let's start with the last row, and you'll be able to see where you go, and there'll be plenty of time to get autographs if you have a book. Okay, so your teachers will help you out in a moment. Thank you again for coming, being part of this.